Anyway, it's lovely to see people here. Thank you very much for coming. In my book, The Image of Christ in Art, I treat artists in a chronological manner from the German Expressionists up to the present day. This talk takes a kind of sub-theme of the book. It's not the same one as I gave at Barnard's Hall a few weeks ago. It takes a sub-theme, and it is focusing only on those works of art which have been commissioned and appear in cathedrals or churches. So I'm not including in this lecture images which are in private collections or museums. This is Walter Hussey, a very fine portrait by his friend Graham Sutherland. Walter Hussey was Vicar of St Matthew's, Northampton. He hadn't got a lot of money, hadn't got any money, and he had no connections when he started. But he did have a fine eye and a fine ear, and he had what the Jewish people call chutzpah. He simply wrote to Benjamin Britten, care of the BBC, the way one does. BBC forwarded on to his musical agent, who wrote back a very snooty letter saying, of course, Mr. Britten's far too busy to answer you, etc., etc. He was very pleased a couple of weeks later to get a letter from Benjamin Britten himself saying, "You write to tell me you have a bee in your bonnet about reconnecting the arts and the church. I write to tell you, so have I. I'd love to write some music for you." And from that came Rejoice with the Lamb. He wrote in a similar way to Bernstein and to Walton, and had great musical pieces in his parish church. And he went down to London once and he saw those wonderful drawings of Henry Moore, and he said, "That is the man for me." Henry Moore was very, very reticent, first of all, about doing anything for the church, because he thought that works of art in church had basically gone dead and that there was no living tradition. But eventually, with the encouragement of Walter Hussey, he tackled this Madonna and Child, and by the end he was very pleased with it. He felt, as he put it, he'd felt himself back into the tradition. And his purpose was not just to do a Mother and Child, but to make something different, a Madonna and Child. And he felt that he had achieved that. I'm going to deliberately leave some of the images on for a few seconds without me talking, so that you can really look at them. Others I will skip over more quickly. Later on, he was asked to do this stone altar for St Stephen's, Walbrook, commissioned by Chad Varra, the founder of the Samaritans. It was a highly controversial piece, and it had to go to the highest ecclesiastical court in the land, called the Court of Ecclesiastical Causes Reserved. They eventually gave permission for this stone altar. Another work which you can see in London of Henry Moore's is in St Paul's Cathedral, a much more abstract version of a Madonna and Child. Henry Moore, after Henry Moore, Walter Hussey decided that he would like some work by Graham Sutherland. Graham Sutherland had really discovered himself as a painter, painting in Pembrokeshire. But he wasn't interested in doing just ordinary landscapes. He liked to focus on details. And he became obsessed with the thorn. And I show this for obvious reasons. This is the crucifixion he did for St Matthew's, Northampton. He particularly asked Walter Hussey whether he could do a crucifixion. He took a long time coming to realize or understand how he wanted to approach it, And in the end, it was seeing those terribly emaciated bodies coming out of Belsen, which finally, as it were, triggered this depiction. Also, like so many artists of the time, he was hugely influenced by Grunewald's Crucifixion. Many people, however, feel that Sutherland's most successful depiction of the crucifixion is this one in the Roman Catholic Church of St. Aidan's in East Acton in London. It absolutely dominates the west wall. Then, as you know, that's a close-up of that one at St. Aidan's, and you can see what I mean about the thorns, which were a particularly important detail for Graham Sutherland. But then, as you know, Graham Sutherland was commissioned to do this great tapestry in the east end of Coventry Cathedral. It took something like 10 years in the making. It's a Christ in Majesty. Many of you will have seen it. I wonder what your reaction to is it. My own view is that in some ways it succeeds, and in other ways it doesn't quite succeed. What I do think succeeded in that tapestry were the 4 images and symbols of the evangelists. There, for instance, is St. Mark. Walter Hussey, who is the seminal influence in religious art in England today, if there has been a revival of religious art over the last 50 or 60 years, as I believe there has, and it's part of the argument of my book that there has, it is more than anything else due to Walter Hussey, because he went on from St. Matthew's, Northampton, to be Dean of Chichester. And this is one of the works he commissioned for Chichester, Noli me tangere, do not touch me, those famous words of the risen Christ to Mary. As you can see, it's a very modernist depiction. If you contrast it with all the great 15th and 16th century depictions by Titian and so on. But it is a work, I think, which succeeds extraordinarily well. Now, the other major figure around at that time was Jacob Epstein. This is his first major church commission. It is Christ in Majesty in Llandaff Cathedral. I myself feel that the concrete arch on which the Christ stands doesn't quite work in that ancient building, though I think the Christ in Majesty, when you come up close, does. Jacob Epstein was brought up in a very devout Jewish family in New York, but he turned away from his Judaism. Nevertheless, the Bible went very deeply into him, and he was particularly drawn to do Christian works of art. He did this for Coventry Cathedral, and again, many of you will have seen this. This is one of his more conventional depictions, if you like. Stands on the outside of the cathedral, very arresting, very powerful, and very accessible. But in the bombed ruins of the old cathedral, you'll find this Ecce Homo. Jacob Epstein made his living with his highly successful bronze portraits of famous people and also people who are not so famous. But his real emotional artistic energy was in his carving. And he was particularly influenced by African carving. He had the best collection of African carving in the country at that time. And his carving was extremely controversial. If you want to see some of his early carving, go to St. James's Park Underground Station and start looking around, and you'll see some of his early carving. Some of his carving in this style was so controversial that, believe it or not, it was bought up by a man to be shown in Blackpool Peep Show for a penny a time. It's unbelievable. This, of course, aroused total vilification when it came out in 1922. Absolute horror, derision, vilification. We think that modern art arouses outrage today. Nothing compared with the kind of outrage that it aroused in the 1920s and 30s. There was no buyer for this, of course, at the time, but thank God, literally, it was donated by his widow, Kathleen Epstein, to Coventry Cathedral on Jacob's death. And there it stands, perfectly set in the ruins of the old cathedral. The implacable Christ, a strong, implacable Christ, standing firm even in the midst of that bombed ruin. This is his depiction of Lazarus. It can be found in the antechapel of New College, Oxford. It's a very powerful work, as well as a very accessible work. Again, totally different from the usual scenes of the raising of Lazarus. This focuses simply on Lazarus, the moment he's, as it were, being woken up into this life and looking back on what he'd seen the other side of death. Now, the other great artist who emerged at that time as a result of the influence of Walter Hussey and through John Betjeman was John Piper. And the first work he did was for windows for Oundle School Chapel. But his best work at that stage was this, which again many of you will have seen. It is the Baptistry Chapel in Coventry Cathedral, an extraordinary, powerful, almost overwhelming in its impact of sheer glory. Walter Hussey again commissioned John Piper to do this reredos of the Holy Trinity for Chichester Cathedral. And John Piper did innumerable windows in churches around and about the country. This is a section of his Benjamin Britten memorial window at Aldeburgh in Suffolk. John Piper had a very interesting trajectory because he was almost more than anybody at the cutting edge of modern art in the 1920s and 30s. But he significantly changed his style to make it in some ways more representative or more figurative without losing that modernist touch. And he was hugely influenced by medieval stained glass. He said that copying a little section of 13th century glass was the biggest influence of anything else on his artistic life. And he came to his own in his church windows. And this is, I think, my favourite one of his, which is in St. Mary's, Iffley, just outside Oxford. It's the Animal Song of the Nativity. Totally charming wonderfully evocative and colourful window. It wasn't only the Anglican Church that these artists were commissioned to do things for. This is the lantern in the great Roman Catholic Metropolitan Cathedral in Liverpool by John Piper. Another artist at that time, who was perhaps not as well known now as the ones I've considered so far, was Ceri Richards, C-E-R-I. This was the sacrament chapel for that Roman Catholic Metropolitan Cathedral in Liverpool. And what I think this shows is that in the right context, even severely abstract art can work, because the art here is very, very abstract, but it really works in that sacrament chapel. The combination of that backdrop to the altar and the light and the windows and the light coming through the windows. Ceri Richards also did other windows. This is one in Derby Cathedral. And this is one of my favourite paintings. It is in the chapel of St Edmund Hall, Oxford, the Supper at Emmaus. I think it is very powerful the way Christ is emerging from the kind of gold background of the cross. He's kind of half there and half not there. And the two almost yokel-like figures of the followers of Jesus are there in combination of bewilderment and stunned awe. Believe it or not, this was commissioned by the junior common room of the college. I wonder whether that could happen today. 3 cheers for the junior common room at that time. This is a less well-known painting of Ceri Richards and deserves to be better known. It's the Deposition, and it is in St Mary's, Swansea. It's a very modernist picture. The dead body of Jesus is lying on a plain sheet in perhaps Swansea High Street, certain amount of debris around. Again, Walter Hussey, Chichester Cathedral, and the other great name from that period of the 20th century, Marc Chagall. Marc Chagall, another Jewish artist, of course, who loved to depict Christian themes and was commissioned to do a great number of windows, both in Germany after the war and in this country. This is Psalm 150 in Chichester Cathedral. This is the east window of Tudley Parish Church, not far from Tunbridge Wells in Kent. I hope that there are a few of you here who will have been to Tudley. There was a sad accident, and the 21-year-old daughter of the family who lived in the big house was drowned in a sailing accident. And they commissioned Marc Chagall to do the east window. And in the east window there is the figure of Christ on the cross, but underneath there is the daughter being drowned, and then the daughter riding on her favourite horse in front of the crucifix. When Chagall came for the unveiling and the blessing of that window, he was so struck by the space inside that he offered to do all the other windows in the church free. And if you go into that church today, outside, it's totally unprepossessing, small, unprepossessing, undistinguished. Inside, it's a kind of heaven of blues and yellows and oranges, of Chagall at his best. Chagall had a very much a strongly mystical Jewish feel for life and made him ideally suited for many church commissions. This is an unusual one. Cecil Collins, again, Chichester Cathedral, Walter Hussey. This is the altarpiece of the great sun on the altar frontal, of Chichester Cathedral. On the staff of Chichester Cathedral later was actually a friend of mine called Keith Walker, whom I know is a great devotee of Cecil Collins. When he left there to become Vicar of All Saints Basingstoke, a very ordinary kind of parish church, he commissioned Cecil Collins to do, first of all, this window, and then also in the same church, these side windows of the angels, with a quote taken based upon a Sufi idea of the eye of the heart. Lovely idea, the eye of the heart. Keith Walker at All Saints Basingstoke not only commissioned Cecil Collins, he also commissioned Elizabeth Frink to do this head of Christ. Just shows what can be done in an ordinary parish church to get the very, very best art of the time if somebody actually believes in it. Also on the theme of Elizabeth Frink, she did this walking Madonna, which many of you will have seen outside Salisbury Cathedral. She said she deliberately wanted to do the Madonna in later life as a vigorous lady striding forward. And just before she died, Elizabeth Frink did this risen Christ for Liverpool Cathedral. It's not easy to see below because it's set very, very high. But this is a close-up of it. It's above the west door when you arrive. There are a number of works of art in Liverpool Cathedral. This you will recognise is a Craigie Aitchson. Craigie Aitchson all his life painted crucifixions, either a single crucifix or three as here, very often with his little Bedlam terrier. It's a great mystery as to why he painted crucifixions. Nobody's quite got to the bottom of it. He never really revealed, but it was clearly hugely, hugely important to him. And Craigie Aitchsons are very accessible and very popular with the general public. And there are two or three of them in churches. There's one, for instance, in, I think it's Truro. This is not by a well-known person, but it's one I very much love. It's by a lady called Hildegard Nicholas, who was Swedish by origin and a designer by training. And after a visit to Ravenna, she took up mosaic work. She used to do smaller mosaics with literally hundreds of thousands of tiny splinters of glass. She was commissioned to do this for the chapel of the John Ratcliffe Hospital in Oxford. I find it, though simple, extraordinarily powerful. The combination of the thin, delicate, sort of brittle wooden cross against the background of the gold, a broken circle, but nevertheless an enclosing circle. I also very much like this one by Hildegard Nicholas, which was commissioned for the chapel of the Bournemouth General Hospital. This is the Prodigal. But it's not the usual prodigal, as you can see there. It's the kind of heavenly prodigal gathering the Son. The Heavenly Father gathering the Son. This is part of a Stations of Cross of the Church of Our Lady in Milton Keynes, done in ceramic by Norman Adams. But this was his most important and powerful Stations of the Cross, which is in St. Mary's Church, Roman Catholic Church in Mulberry Street in Manchester. Norman Adams, who was a distinguished academician of the Royal Academy and was keeper of the Royal Academy for many years, was best known in his lifetime for his landscapes of Yorkshire and of the Outer Hebrides. And if you look on his website, you'll see that most of his works that are depicted are of that character. But particularly towards the end of his life, he began to focus more on religious themes. And not long ago, there was the first exhibition in Guildford Cathedral of some of his so far unexhibited religious paintings, and very powerful they are. And apparently there's a great cache of them in his old home and studio in Yorkshire. And I think we will be hearing more about him in the years to come. But this Station 10, which my wife and I saw at the Royal Academy about 25 years ago before they went up to Manchester, and totally bowled us over. Norman Adams said it was the most important work he'd done, and I can well believe that. Sorry, I seem to have topped off the top of that by mistake. This is a work in Winchester Cathedral. I think I'll move on to the other one. Perhaps you can. That's also. But these are two works that I've shown by Peter Ball, both in Winchester Cathedral. That is the Pieta, and that is the Crucifixion. He calls it the Crucifixion, but of course also could be a Christ ascended or Christ in glory. And you can see there he's clearly using resonances of Romanesque style and Celtic art, but it's not mere pastiche. It's one of the examples, I think, of successful immersion and use of tradition in order to revive modern art. Winchester Cathedral have been in the forefront of commissioning good works of modern art, and those Peter Ball's are just one example of the work which they have commissioned. This is something very different. He died just a couple of weeks ago, Sir Anthony Caro, who I suppose more than anybody else would be regarded as at the cutting edge of modern art. He switched from fairly conventional sculpture a la Henry Moore, started to use great pieces of industrial waste, but was hugely respected in the art world. And this was a work of his commissioned by Christ College, Cambridge. You can see it there. It is another deposition. He did a number of depositions, as it were, copying or based on the tradition of people like Rubens and Rembrandt. But this is one which stands, as it were, in its own right, though clearly influenced by tradition. I think what this brings out, whether you like this work or not, and this is one of the arguments of my book, and that is that modern art has actually, despite everything, turned out to be a great friend rather than an enemy of Christian art. The more I sort of wrote that book, the more convinced I became that modern art, which arouses so much or has aroused so much hostility and people see it as inimical to religious art, has actually turned out to be the friend of religious art. Anyway, that is something at the cutting edge of modern art by Sir Anthony Caro. This is a more accessible piece, which you may very well have seen by, I've written the name down, let me get, because I always have difficulty I have difficulty pronouncing it. Shirazeh Houshiary, there we are. So there it is. And it is in St. Martin's in the Field, part of their total refurbishment and revamp in the most wonderful way. And you can see that it's very accessible in a way. It's abstract, and yet there's a clear hint of the cross. There's something kind of almost egg shape in the middle, which is kind of a giving birth, a resurrection, an expansion there. But it's kind of nicely non-symmetrical. So there's a kind of a life and a giving forth from it, which is very accessible, very, I think, effective. So that's another example, I think, of where a work of art, however abstract or semi-abstract, can actually work in a Christian context. Here is one of a group of artists, very, very prolific today. This is Mark Cazalet. He's done a lot of work in churches in a variety of different media. This is his flowering tree or tree of life in Chelmsford Cathedral. Another artist who belonged to that group, Nicholas Mynheer. This is his depiction of two angels for the Mulberry of St. Mary's, Iffley. And this is also in St. Mary's, Iffley. It is The Flowering Tree by Roger Wagner. Have I got a close-up of that? Yes, I have. I've got a close-up of that. Let's just look at that for a minute. This window is beautifully placed in St. Mary's, Iffley, which, if you don't know it, is really worth a visit. It's a wonderful 12th century church with a lot of its original 12th century carving there, but it has that John Piper window, it has this Roger Wagner window, and it has the Nicholas Mynheer angels guarding the Mulberry, and they're also commissioning a new font covering soon. Some of you, I think, might possibly have been to the kind of day I did, whenever it was, at Bernard's Inn Hall with Roger Wagner, when he talked about being a modern artist. Roger Wagner is an extraordinarily talented person. He's a good poet. He read English at Oxford, then after art school also taught himself Hebrew. He's done a wonderful version of the Psalms with his own translation of the Psalms together with his own drawings in it. He's a meticulous painter, can sometimes spend a year over a painting. But he's also very, very thoughtful. And in the book I quote some of the things he writes about. The challenge of being a Christian artist in a modern context. How to, as it were, stand in the tradition and use the tradition at the same time as being modern. A person whom he feels very close to, I think, is T.S. Eliot. And T.S. Eliot helped to rediscover for us the importance of tradition, not as tradition as something outmoded or antiquarian, but as tradition which enables you, first of all, to see the modern as truly modern, but also which enables one to use it in relation to the modern. And Roger Wagner is one of those artists who uses the tradition, but not in order to be antiquarian or to get back to the past, but to bring into the present and, as it were, illuminate the present. And he talks about the number of influences which have gone into this tree of life, not least the great 12th century tree of life in San Clemente in Rome. And there are quite a lot of his images in my book. I think that's, we're coming now towards the end of the image I'm going to show, because I'm leaving plenty of time for discussion tonight, this afternoon. We can go back and look at some of those images you might particularly want to talk about. I'd rather do too few than too many, I think, as I've learnt in the past. This is a very, very recent work of art commissioned by St. Dunstan's Mayfield. It's by one of our best-known modern artists, Maggie Hambling. Maggie Hambling, every Good Friday, paints a depiction of the crucifixion. Every Good Friday she spends the whole day focusing on the crucifixion and painting a different aspect of it every year. And here she was unable to do something for the church. Apparently the verger died and left some money for the church to commission something, and the church bravely commissioned a modern work. She's called this Risen Spirit. And it's metal. It hangs above the altar. And when I went down there to open this, and she was there, she said kind of rather ruefully, well, at least it's hung high, so they won't be able to put graffiti on it, as they have on my work of art in Albury. Some of you will know Albury. There's that great kind of scallop shell there, which some people have put some graffiti on. I like this Risen Spirit. It conveys all kinds of things. It can be the human spirit rising up. It can be the Holy Spirit, of course, which is usually symbolized by a dove. It can be human aspiration. Or it can be a symbol for the risen Christ as well. I think the point about a real work of art, it can be seen in so many different ways. So, dear friends, I think that's all the images I'm going to show as part of this formal thing. Well, thank you very much indeed. It's been a great pleasure for me to be able to show you these images again. I love looking at them myself, and I hope you have. If anybody wants a signed copy of the book, they are available afterwards out in the foyer. Thank you.